While the outer circle panics over red screens, the bumblebees are watching the demolition of the financial status quo. On January 30th, 2026, Donald Trump nominated Kevin Warsh to replace Jerome Powell, and the market reaction was a literal execution. In 48 hours, $15 trillion in wealth evaporated as the Warsh shock hit. Gold, silver, and Bitcoin didn't just dip, they were liquidated in a brutal rescue operation for the US dollar. If you have cash in the market, the rules of the ledger just change forever. I don't care about politics. I care about the math of survival. To the average investor, this looks like a random sell-off, but the bumblebees know this is the Warsh pivot. We are moving from a world of artificial stability to a world of hard productivity. I'm the Asian girl, and today we decode why Trump chose the one man the markets feared most. If you don't understand the man holding the rate bazooka, you are the exit liquidity for the institutions already moving their money. So who is Kevin Warsh, and why does his name strike fear into the outer circle? Between 2006 and 2011, Warsh was the youngest governor in Fed history, serving in the trenches during the 2008 collapse. But he wasn't a print-first bureaucrat. He is the man who famously resigned in 2011 because he refused to sign off on $600 billion of QE2, calling the benefits small and fleeting, and warned that the Fed was becoming a prisoner of its own words. He is a shadow hawk because he prioritizes the credibility of the dollar over the comfort of the S&P 500. The bumblebees need to understand his core doctrine, trend dependence. Warsh has criticized Jerome Powell for being backward-looking and obsessed with 2 decimal points of old government data. Instead, Warsh looks at the hard ledger of productivity. He believes the Fed's $7 trillion balance sheet is a bloated distortion of the free market that needs to be reduced significantly to wean Wall Street off its addiction to cheap certainty. His reputation as an inflation hawk is why $15 trillion in market cap evaporated the moment he was nominated. To Warsh, inflation is a choice, and he believes the Fed has made the wrong one for too long. By removing the Fed's safety net from the bond market, he is effectively telling the banks, the bailout era is over. Either produce value or fail. For the bumblebees, this means we are moving into a market where cash is no longer trash. It is a weapon for those waiting for the final liquidation of the non-productive outer circle. There is a massive contradiction happening that most people are missing. For a year, Trump promised a rate bazooka and a return to 1% interest rates to save the American mortgage market. So why appoint Kevin Warsh, the man who literally resigned in protest over cheap money? This is the Warsh paradox. To the outer circle, it looks like a flip-flop. To the bumblebees, it's a sophisticated rebranding of the Federal Reserve's mission. Warsh has provided Trump with the ultimate intellectual cover through his AI productivity thesis. In his recent filings and public commentary, Warsh argues that the Fed's old models are broken because they treat growth as a threat. He believes the $561 billion being poured into AI infrastructure by big tech is a massive deflationary engine. In the Warsh doctrine, we can have 4% GDP growth and 1% interest rates at the same time. Not because we're printing money, but because AI is making every hour of American labor exponentially more productive. This is why Trump calls him central casting. Warsh gives the administration exactly what it wants: lower rates, while maintaining the hawk street cred that keeps the bond market from revolting. He is essentially telling the world, we aren't cutting rates to bail out the banks, we're cutting rates to fund the AI revolution. For the bumblebees, the message is clear. The Fed is no longer trying to manage your cost of living, they are trying to finance a global productivity war. If you are positioned in the companies building those AI rails, you are the primary beneficiary of the Trump-Warsh alliance. Listen, if you looked at your gold and silver holdings on Friday, January 30th, and felt like you'd been punched in the gut, just know you weren't alone. We witnessed a historic $15 trillion wipeout that looked less like a market correction and more like a scene from a financial horror movie. The Warsh shock hit so hard that silver plummeted 36% intraday to $78.29, which, for my friends who remember the 80s, was a move so violent it effectively sent the entire metals exchange into a 7 sigma cardiac arrest. While the outer circle was panicking, a massive $10 billion short position was closed at the exact bottom, proving once again that the big banks treat a crisis like a clearance sale at Costco, while everyone else is running for the exits. Bitcoin didn't escape the carnage either, breaking its $80,000 floor and triggering over $111 billion in forced margin calls, which is just a fancy way of saying a lot of over-leveraged kids just lost their lunch money to the institutional sharks. Ultimately, this liquidation wasn't an accident. It was a brutal rescue operation designed to flush out the speculative froth and force capital back into a stronger US dollar, resetting the ledger just in time for the new Fed regime to take over. Warsh is betting on a structural productivity boom driven by $561 billion in AI capex from Meta and Microsoft. He believes AI is a deflationary engine that allows for 4% growth without price spikes. This gives him intellectual cover to cut rates while shrinking the Fed's $7 trillion balance sheet. It's a swap. We trade printed money for productive efficiency. This rewards the owners of AI infrastructure and punishes those holding non-productive paper hedges. If you thought Bitcoin was your digital gold insurance policy against a falling market, January 30th was a very expensive wake-up call that felt more like a bucket of ice water to the face. While the outer circle was waiting for a moonshot, Bitcoin decided to take the stairs, straight down, plunging from $96,000 to a gut-wrenching $77,000 in a single day as it lost its fight to stay above that critical $80,000 psychological floor. It turns out that when the Fed even whispers about tighter policy, the $1.3 billion in leveraged lunch money positions gets liquidated faster than a free sample tray at Costco, proving BTC is currently acting more like a high-beta tech stock than a stable store of value. The real kicker for my fellow bumblebees is that Bitcoin slipped below the ETF realized price, meaning the big institutional players are now sitting on unrealized losses and might start sweating through their expensive suits if we don't see a bounce soon. So, while the 20-somethings on X are screaming about the dip, we're looking at this with a slight smirk. It's not a crash, it's a forced deleveraging that's finally flushing the hype out of the ledger so the real adults can decide where the true value lies. The most hush-hush part of this transition is the talk of a new Fed Treasury Accord, an idea Kevin Warsh has championed to effectively end the era where the Fed acts as the stock market's personal bodyguard. He wants to return to a 1951-style agreement where the Fed focuses on setting short-term interest rates while the Treasury takes over the heavy lifting of managing the government's massive bond supply, potentially cutting out the Wall Street middleman entirely. For those of us who've seen the banking sector get bailed out one too many times, this is a bit like the Fed finally telling the big banks to move out of the basement and get a real job. The bumblebees need to watch this closely because a coordinated accord means less forward guidance, less hand-holding, and more market-driven volatility, which is great for us if we're sitting on cash, but a nightmare for the outer circle, who can't trade without a Fed safety net. By shrinking the Fed's $7 trillion footprint and letting the Treasury manage its own debt, Warsh is trying to restore adult price discovery to the bond market. And while the transition might be bumpy, it's the only way to keep the dollar from becoming a museum relic. Look, the math of 2026 is brutally simple, but the morality of it is where things get a bit modern feudalism for my taste. We are moving from an economy that rewards your savings account to one that only rewards your productivity output. Think of it like this. The outer circle is still playing by the 1990s rulebook, waiting for a 5% CD rate to retire, while the new Fed Treasury Alliance is essentially saying, if your capital isn't building an AI cluster or a power plant, it's just taking up space. It's a bit like being told your hard-earned pension is now competing with a robot that doesn't need health insurance or a coffee break, which, let's be honest, is a tough pill to swallow after 40 years of playing by the old rules. The moral here is that the government has realized they can't print their way out of $37 trillion in debt, so they're using the Warsh-Trump pivot to force us into a high-growth era where only tangible value, not paper promises, keeps its purchasing power. For the bumblebees, the lesson is clear. Don't get mad at the machine. Just make sure you're the one who owns the toll booths on the new digital highway, so you're not the one paying the rent in this new feudal system. Now, for the part that actually pays the bills. How do we position ourselves so we're not just watching the charts like a bad soap opera? The Warsh-Trump era rewards those who own the infrastructure toll booths, the energy and hardware companies like Vistra and Constellation that provide the literal power for the AI revolution. Because even the smartest AI can't run on a dead battery. You need to look at your portfolio and apply the Barron ratio. 70, 20, 10. Putting 70% of your focus into these policy-protected real economy moats while keeping 10% in tactical cash to scoop up the outer circle's panic selling at a discount. It's about being like the guy who sold shovels during the gold rush. While everyone else is gambling on which crypto coin might moon, you're busy owning the poles and wires that every single one of those coins has to pay a fee to use. Don't let the 24-hour news cycle trick you into thinking the game is over. We are simply entering the accumulation phase, where the patient 50-plus investor quietly builds the next decade of generational wealth while the kids are busy fighting over digital stickers. If the Fed is going to force a productivity boom, then your job is simple. Buy the companies that make that productivity possible, set your stop losses, and go enjoy a cup of coffee while the ledger does the heavy lifting for you. We are witnessing the rebranding of the American economy, where energy from the past and infrastructure of the future are being merged to cement dominance for decades. Bumblebees. The wealth gap in 2026 is purely an information gap. While the outer circle waits for permission to be wealthy, you are already positioning for the payout. I'm the Asian girl, bringing clarity to the decisions quietly shaping your money. Stay informed, stay focused, and I'll see you in the next one. Drink some water, you've earned it. Click here to watch another video. YouTube picked it out for you based on what you like watching.